Seeking Beauty by Donis Boy. Chapter 7. Rarity wrote the day she had ever heard the word diner. With every jolt and jostle of the train, the unicorn could feel her stomach give a foreboding lurch. The previous evening's fries and hay burger sat in her belly as heavy as rocks. Of course, in addition to all that, there was the deplorable state of filth in which the entire restaurant had existed. She shuddered to even think of it. Well, she would have shuddered, except that doing so would have woken up Snips, whose head lolled against Rarity's shoulder while the young stallion snored away like a lumberjack. She suppressed a sigh. He'd been so excited at the prospect of a visit to Ponyville that Rarity hadn't had the heart to leave him behind, but right now, she was questioning the wisdom of the decision. She could only hope Pinky would be back soon from her foray to the dining car. To while away the time, and to take her mind off her stomach ache, Rarity used her magic to pull out a cooling sheet of paper from the carry-on bag that rested at her feet. She laid the paper on the empty wooden seat in front of her and thoughtfully bit her lip. "My dearest Duchess," she began, her quill strokes short and tentative. Would that be too forward or familiar? Or even be regarded as sarcastic? One had to take extra care with the written word, after all, as tone could be so hard to infer. Perhaps she'd best try again. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "Dear Duchess, I must offer you my deepest apologies for the disgraceful behavior I exhibited at your most recent social event. It was unacceptable under any circumstances, as well as an insult to your considerable hospitality, and I have felt terribly about it ever since." Rarity paused. For just a second she pondered over whether she should admit to what Pinky had told her. But then she remembered a charmless prince at a joyless gala, whose memory was quickly followed by one of her plummeting through the air while staring deeply into the wide, trusting eyes of a young dragon. And, just like that, she knew that she shouldn't breathe a word of what Pinky had confessed. If she could offer nothing else to the Duchess, she could at least do what she could to preserve the poor mare's sense of dignity. "Whatcha doing?" With just a tiny jump, Rarity glanced up from her letter to find that Pinky had returned and now sat in the seat beside her. The earth pony grinned widely and carried a pile of cookies, cuddled against her chest as one might hold a foal. "Ah, hello there, Pinky," the unicorn replied, careful to keep her voice low so as to not wake her assistant. "I'm just penning a bit of an apology note to the Duchess of Hoofington. How was the dining car?" Pinkie Pie eyed the sheet of paper with a furrowed brow. "Oh, the dining car was good. Not enough kumquats, but that's a pretty common problem. Trains, no. So I got a bunch of cookies instead." She cocked her head. "Are you gonna invite the Duchess to our party?" "Darling, I must remind you that I still have yet to agree to even hold a party." "But Rarity, how we gonna make her smile if we don't have a party?" Rarity shushed the other mare, while gesturing towards the still sleeping Snips, before she replied. "Firstly, I'm not sure either of us are really in the best position to be bringing a smile to the Duchess' face, all things considered. And secondly, while parties are absolutely delightful, they can't solve everything, you know." Pinky squinted at her and mouthed the words, "can't solve everything," with a deeply confused expression on her face. With an indulgent sigh, Rarity leaned over and placed a kiss on the other mare's cheek. "Never mind, my dear. Forget I said anything. Done, and done." Pinky grinned widely, and almost involuntarily Rarity smiled in return. "You're beautiful." The words were out of Rarity's mouth before she'd even realized she'd been thinking them. "You're one of the most beautiful ponies I've ever met. Do you realize that?" And it was then that Rarity came face to face with something she'd never thought she would see. A completely speechless Pinkie Pie. She could swear the earth pony was even blushing, just a tiny bit. The unicorn's smile turned tender. "I first noticed it the night of the after-party, but I don't think it was until just yesterday that I really saw. That I really, truly understood." She leaned back slightly and gave Pinky an appraising look. There are so many different kinds of beauty, I am finding, and I feel as though I've learned more about them with you over the last few days than I have in the last several years. Oh, Rarity. I hope to learn much more, too. If you would be amenable to teaching me, darling. I think. Flustered, Pinky giggled a bit. Her eyes shone with a hint of wetness. I think that sounds super. Really, really super. Then, before either of them could say anything further, a voice shouted out, "Next stop, Ponyville. Ponyville, next stop." "Where's that?" Snips bolted upright with a snort. "Wasn't sleeping in class, Miss Cheerily. Honest." The two mares glanced at the stallion, then back to one another before both burst into giggles. The moment from earlier was gone, but Rarity found she didn't mind so terribly much. There would be other moments, other opportunities. Of that she felt quite sure. As soon as she stepped off the train, Rarity was tackled to the train platform by a blur of yellow fur and feathers. After taking a moment to gather her wits, she smiled gently and returned Fluttershy's enthusiastic hug. One never received hugs like this in Canterlot, after all. It was best to take advantage of it while she could. Meanwhile, Twilight Sparkle's eyes went wide as Pinky bounded off the train next. "So it's true that you decided to come to Rainbow's surprise party," Fluttershy interjected, shooting an indecipherable look in Twilight's direction. "Oh. Right." Twilight began nodding energetically. "Yes. The surprise party. That is totally what I was referring to, yes." Rarity gave her two friends a penetrating stare. "Darlings, is everything all right? You are both acting stranger than usual, no offense." While Fluttershy disentangled herself enough from Rarity to stand back up, the white unicorn studied her two friends. They looked much the same as they had the last time she had visited town. Twilight had the exact same mane guard she had had from the very first day she'd set hoof in Ponyville, which surprised Rarity not in the least, and the only real difference in her appearance from those bygone days was the pair of reading glasses that hung from a cord around her neck. Fluttershy, for her part, had her long mane tied back in a loose, casual braid. Rarity suspected that the braid was due to equal parts developed confidence, negating the prior need to hide behind a lengthy, flowing mane, and a desire to keep the hair from her face as she went about her daily chores around the cottage. Their little group was still incomplete, however. She wondered as to how Applejack and Rainbow Dash were looking these days, and, as if she'd spoken that thought aloud, Pinky piped up, "Hey, where are Dashy and Applejack?" "They're both at Sweet Apple Acres right now." Fluttershy smiled and blushed a bit. "Applejack said she tried to keep Rainbow Dash, occupied while we set up the surprise party." Pinky's eyes lit up. "Oh. So Dashy doesn't even know that we're in Ponyville. Then it'll be an extra super duper surprise." Rarity tilted her head as she realized someone else was missing, too. "And where is dear little Spiky Wikey?" "Well, first of all, he's not so little," replied Twilight, with an amused chuckle. "He's grown another 2 or 3 inches since you last saw him. And he stayed back at the library. I asked if he wanted to come to the station with Fluttershy and me, but..." She paused to sigh. "But he told me that he was, and I quote, in mourning. Which is more than a little melodramatic, if you ask me." "Oh, dear. Is he quite all right?" Twilight rolled her eyes. "He'll be just fine. Trust me." "If you're certain, Twilight." "Well, in that case, we'd best make the most of the time available, then, and get Pinky's party set up while Rainbow is otherwise engaged." Rarity glanced over her shoulder and added, in a slightly imperious tone, "Snips. Aren't you coming, darling?" The other 3 ponies followed Rarity's gaze, towards the open door on the train car, just as the unicorn stallion came stumbling out onto the platform. His steps were shaky and uncertain, as he was weighed down under a veritable mountain of luggage. Twilight raised an eyebrow at Rarity, as the little quintet began walking away from the train tracks. And just how long were you planning to stay in town? Oh, just for the weekend. But you never know what outfit you might need or when. Best to be prepared, I always say. Pinky nodded in agreement and replied, very seriously, that's why I always pack extra balloons and backup supply of streamers whenever I go on a trip. Never know when you're gonna encounter a party emergency. Twilight Sparkle blinked. I see. I think. As Twilight seemed to puzzle over the concept of a party emergency, Fluttershy quietly inquired, will you be staying at the cottage again, Rarity? I'm always happy to have you, you know. Oh. Rarity hadn't given two thoughts as to her lodging arrangements, actually. The events of the last few days had taken up most of her attention. That's very kind of you, Fluttershy, but... well, you see... Pinky quickly cut in. But I kinda already asked Rarity to stay at Sugar Cube Corner. Cause, I was the one to invite her to Ponyville and all. Rarity looked over towards her Pegasus friend with a worried expression. Is that alright, darling? I know I've usually stayed with you ever since I sold the old boutique, and I'd hate to think I'll offend you if I stay elsewhere. Oh, no, that's fine. Fluttershy smiled softly, and her eyes sparkled with some emotion that Rarity couldn't quite place. Don't worry, Rarity. I understand. The unicorn was tempted to ask just what it was that Fluttershy understood, but a side conversation that had started up between Twilight and Snips, regarding how well the young stallion had been adjusting to life in Canterlot, quickly distracted Rarity from that line of thought. Soon she was joining in on the conversation, praising Snip's skills as an assistant and alternately giggling and rolling her eyes at Pinky's humorous little interjections, as they cheerfully ambled away from the train station. This is totally awesome. Rainbow Dash stood in the center of Sugar Cube Corner, which had been decorated to within an inch of its life with streamers every color under the sun, and wore as broad a grin as Rarity could remember ever seeing on her friend's face. With a little squeal of joy, Pinkie Pie bounded forward and threw herself at Rainbow, hugging the Pegasus tightly. Were you surprised, Dashy? Oh, I hope so. 'Cause you sure look surprised. Yeah, definitely. Dash chuckled before turning to Rarity. Were you in on this, too? Rarity smiled. No, I'm afraid not. I was mostly just along for the ride, you might say. She used her magic to pick up a package from a nearby table and levitate it over to the Pegasus. This, however, is indeed my doing. Rainbow Dash's eyes lit up. I get presents, too. Huh. Best surprise party ever. Wiggling herself free from Pinkie's embrace, Rainbow quickly took the package between her hooves and began tearing off the wrapping paper with her teeth. Rarity studied her athletic friend as she did so. Rainbow Dash's hair was considerably shorter than it had been the last time they'd seen one another. It rather resembled that one Wonderbolt's main style, now that Rarity thought about it. What was that pony's name? Sunfire? Spitfire? Look, guys, it's a dress, said Dash, holding up the garment and running a lopsided grin. Never well guessed. Applejack let out a little snort of amusement. She was standing right beside Rainbow and looked exactly as she'd always looked. Indeed, sometimes Rarity suspected that Applejack had been born with that beaten-up old Stetson atop her head. Putting on a pout, the unicorn pretended to be offended. Now, Rainbow. As a Wonderbolt, you surely attend many formal events and need to look your best, do you not? Hey, you know I was just kidding, right? Seriously, Rarity, it's a really awesome dress. Thanks bunches. Think nothing of it, darling. I'm simply happy that you're happy. From her position over by the refreshments table, Fluttershy spoke up. Why don't you go try it on, Rainbow? If you want to, that is. Yes, please do. Rarity nodded eagerly. I've only seen how it looks on the mannequin thus far, but I think your beautiful coat coloring will look simply stunning against the dress fabric. The boastful Pegasus didn't need much encouragement, and soon she was trotting happily upstairs to use Pinky's loft apartment to change. As soon as Rainbow Dash had left, Applejack sauntered up to Rarity with a broad grin. So, Rare. If all them Canterlot papers can be believed, then you've gone and made quite a name for yourself in the fashion world, shouted Twilight, with a nervous giggle. She glanced over to the farm pony. Isn't that right, Applejack? Applejack frowned in evident confusion. I reckon so. Something wasn't right here. As unease curled up in her stomach, Rarity cut her eyes over to Pinkie Pie and raised a questioning eyebrow. But Pinkie just smiled at her and shrugged. Rarity sighed as she turned back towards the others. I trust that eventually all of you will explain just what is going on here? Oh, yes, Fluttershy replied in a reassuring tone, nodding. Explain? Blurted out Twilight, at the exact same time. What's there to explain? If Rarity's eyebrow went any higher, it would be on the opposite side of her head. Abruptly, she whirled around so that she was face to face with Applejack, and she narrowed her eyes. Applejack. You are the element of honesty. I know you'd never stoop so low as to lie to such an old and beloved friend as I am, now would you, darling? Applejack's eyes went wide in panic. I don't right know what you're talking about, Rare. There was a loud clap of hoofs from above, and all of the ponies on the first floor of the bakery glanced up in time to see Rainbow Dash begin descending the stairs. She was a vision of gloriousness and grace in the dress, nigh utter perfection, as the chiffon swirled fetchingly around Rainbow's legs with her every movement. Rarity felt a burst of pride and satisfaction as she saw how her dress enhanced the Pegasus' natural beauty. Once she'd reached the main floor, Rainbow Dash grinned at all of her friends. So what did I miss? Did Pinkie and Rarity admit they're full of friends yet? As the party wore on, they separated into smaller groups. By the bakery's front windows sat Fluttershy with Twilight Sparkle. Fluttershy was speaking quietly but with great animation about some new experiment in horticulture, and Twilight was nodding at appropriate intervals. Snips had long ago disappeared somewhere or other with young Miss Twist. Rarity suspected that they were on a romantic moonlit stroll. At least, she hoped they were. Snips was a lovely and lovable stallion, for all his failings as an assistant, and he deserved a bit of happiness. Meanwhile, Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash were 10 cookies into an eating contest, and Rarity was beginning to feel ill just looking at the two of them. She'd never fully understood how those two ponies could eat as much food as they did and never gain an ounce. Certainly, Rainbow had on her side the fact that she was a Pegasus, and Pegasus ponies were nearly hummingbirds in their metabolisms, and Pinkie never rested for a single moment while awake. Still, though, every so often, Pinkie would glance over and give Rarity a flirtatious wink, which did help quell the unicorn's disgust at the proceedings, and also, much to her chagrin, caused her to blush. And for her own part, Dash would occasionally look up and grin at Applejack, who stood watching beside Rarity. The Earth Pony would simply shake her head, while grinning in return. As she sipped cider from a mug, Applejack lazily asked, "Kinda gross, ain't it? The whole eating contest business." Rarity nodded her agreement. Indeed. Quite so. Rainbow's been staying at the farm, you know. Just over the last few days, that dang Pegasus has nearly eaten us out o' house and home. I can't say as I'm surprised. Rarity smiled. I've noticed an increase in my food expenses during the time that Pinkie has been in Canterlot, as well. Applejack chuckled heartily at that, before the two of them backfell into silence. It wasn't like those silences at Canterlot social functions, where the silence was wielded as a weapon and cut to the bone. No, this was an entirely different sort of silence. Easy, gentle, friendly. Not unlike Applejack herself, really. Rarity decided that she liked it. Hey, Rare? The tentative note in Applejack's voice caused the unicorn to glance over, and she saw that the farm pony was shuffling her hooves a bit. I just wanted to let you know. We were all real happy when we heard about you and Pinky. Confused as the dickens, mind ya, but happy. We've been worried about ya. Rarity blinked in surprise. Worried? Whatever for? Applejack gave a slight shrug. Well, you've been surrounded by all them fancy city ponies for so long, and we weren't real sure whether they appreciated you the way we do. Whether they'd look after you, you'd know. But we knew Pinky wouldn't let nothing happen to you. Well, nothing that she didn't cause herself. Rarity opened her mouth to protest the ridiculous idea that she needed looking after, but then she thought better of it. Sneaking a glance over towards Pinky, who was laughing uproariously at something Rainbow Dash had just said or done, she replied, I fended for myself fairly well, I should like to think. But I must admit that it's been a pleasant change of pace, having someone there to catch me when I take a fall. She paused. And it's good to be back in Ponyville. And it's good to have you home, Sugar Cube. Applejack grinned, and there was a gleam in her eyes. Even if you are as much of a persnickety fuss budget as ever. I must say, my dear Applejack, that I find you just as stubborn and unconcerned with propriety as the day we met, as well. She smiled warmly. Don't ever change, darling. Wasn't intending to. The farm pony's grin faded slightly. But seriously, though. You ever think about moving back? Rarity drew in her breath. That was a question she honestly wasn't sure she was ready to answer. She'd felt a tremendous sense of ease and happiness ever since they'd stepped off the train, it was true, but years of work and effort and striving had been poured into building the life she had in Canterlot. I mean, I ain't trained to pry. I just know that Rainbow's been thinking of coming back, and I figured. Wait a moment, darling. Why in Equestria would Rainbow Dash? All of a sudden Applejack wouldn't meet her eyes, and Rarity could swear she saw a hint of a blush on the farmer's cheeks. And just like that, everything fell into place. In fact, Rarity couldn't believe she hadn't pieced it all together earlier. Why Pinky had sent the telegram to Applejack. Why Rainbow was staying at the farm. Why Rainbow kept looking over at Applejack and grinning. I cannot believe it, the unicorn breathed, her voice caught between a giggle and a gasp. You and Rainbow Dash? Not so loud. Besides, it ain't nothing official like. She ain't promised me her hoofing marriage or anything, I mean. But Rarity couldn't resist clopping her hooves together in glee. Oh, this is wonderful, darling. Just splendid. She threw her forelegs around Applejack, who whinnied in distress. I'd given up hope for your romantic prospects ages ago, my dear Applejack, but Rainbow Dash may be the one pony even more hopeless than you're in the realm. I'm gonna get you for this, Rarity, Applejack muttered under her breath. You just wait and see. Then, from across the room came a sudden squeal. Dashy and Applejack are dating. Oh my gosh. We should totally throw them a party. Ah, come on, AJ. I thought we weren't gonna tell any pony till apple bucking season was over. As Rarity pulled back from her hug, Applejack glared her very best glare. The unicorn chuckled apologetically and, after a beat or two of stern silence, Applejack softened and began chuckling too. Chapter 8. And this is the tube assembly, that's the mount, and here's the eyepiece. Ooh, and this little piece is called the finder scope, and it helps you locate. Rarity was seriously questioning the wisdom of having asked Twilight Sparkle to allow her the use of one of her many telescopes. Biting her lip, she ventured, perhaps, darling, you could just let me know when everything is prepared and we can see the stars? Twilight frowned for a second, seeming puzzled, before she gave a cheerful little nod. Sure. Shouldn't take long. It's just about ready to go. Rarity took a step back as Twilight continued to fiddle with the telescope's settings. Both unicorns were standing on a quiet hill just outside Ponyville. Above them was laid out an immense expanse of perfect black sky, dotted with a million twinkling lights. Not a single cloud marred the beautiful sight of the starry night sky, and Rarity gave silent thanks to the Pegasus for clearing away all the clouds. A little distance away sat the rest of their little group, lolling on picnic blankets. Fluttershy was chatting with Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie, while Applejack lay nestled against Dash's side, peacefully snoring away. Rarity couldn't help a small giggle. It was getting rather late, and the Earth Pony had likely been up and working since before sunrise. The farmer looked rather adorable in her sleeping state, truth be told, even vulnerable almost. Then there was Spike. Twilight had managed to convince him to join the rest of them for this stargazing outing, but he sat on the other side of the hill from the others, with his knees tapped up tight against his chest. Rarity felt a pang just from looking at the sad, faraway expression in his eyes. "Twilight? Would you mind if I went to go have a word with Spike as you finish setting up the telescope?" That might not be a bad idea, actually. The other unicorn glanced up from their equipment and laid a hoof on Rarity's shoulder. "Just don't take it too personally if he's a bit, temperamental, okay?" The news was a bit of a blow for him. Rarity offered up one of her most winning smiles. "I shall be the very model of patience, understanding, and tact." With that, she left Twilight to her telescope adjustments and trotted off toward where Spike was sitting. She stood waiting for a moment once she'd reached him, but the young dragon neither spoke nor looked up. Finally, with a soft sigh, she sat down beside him and tried not to think too hard about how the dewy grass might stain her white coat. "I'm quite glad you were able to come out with us," she began softly. "It wouldn't be a proper visit to Ponyville if I wasn't able to see my Spikey Wikey." Still, Spike said nothing. Rarity briefly thought about reaching out, to pet him or cuddle him, before deciding against it. "I wish I could." "I'm sorry that you are hurting, darling. I never wanted that." "I know," muttered Spike, sounding as miserable as he looked. "Oh, Spike. I do love you, as a friend and as family, and I always have. I always shall." She glanced toward her other friends and caught Pinkie staring in their direction. The pink pony's eyes were anxious and troubled. "Though I know I have no right to do so, I would like to ask a favor of you, Spike. Please don't hold this against Pinkie. She'll never say so out loud, but she's terribly worried that you're angry with her and that she'll lose your friendship." Spike sighed gustily. "I'm not mad at her. Not really. Just... I dunno. It's hard." Rarity nodded sympathetically. "It is. But you are one of the strongest individuals I have ever known, and I have no doubts that you will not just persevere but triumph." She gave a wink to the still watching Pinkie Pie and, after a moment, Pinkie turned back around. "Time heals all wounds, or so they say. And I imagine any wounds not healed by time might be helped along with a few sapphire cupcakes." Finally, Spike lifted his head, with a thoughtful look on his face. "You really think Pinkie would make me a sapphire cupcake? Those were pretty good." "My dear Spike. Pinkie would make you a mountain of sapphire cupcakes if you but asked." "Okay, everyone." Twilight's voice rang out across the entire hillside. "Telescope's ready, and I've got it pointed right at the Star-Swirl Nebula." Immediately, Pinkie Pie bounded over to take a look, while Fluttershy followed at a slower pace and Rainbow Dash began trying to prod Applejack awake. For her own part, Rarity looked over to her young dragon companion and lifted an eyebrow. "Well, darling? Shall we go listen to Professor Sparkle's no doubt fascinating lecture on the more esoteric aspects of astronomy?" Spike laughed at that, a real laugh, deep from the belly. It was as beautiful to Rarity's ears as the finest concerto she had heard in Canterlot's famed music halls. Waving goodnight to Twilight and Spike, Rarity and Pinkie Pie walked away from the library in the general direction of Sugar Cube Corner. Pinkie was bouncing along, as always, but somehow managed to time her bounces so that she stayed right by Rarity's side as the unicorn trotted along in a more dignified manner. It was rather uncanny, Pinky's ability to do so. Rarity decided it was best to not question it. So, Pinky was looking straight ahead and seemed a bit uncomfortable. "How's Spike doing?" Rarity felt her face ease into a smile. "He's still adjusting to things, but I believe in time he'll be right as rain again. A batch of sapphire cupcakes should help matters along rather nicely, though, I should think." Pinky nodded with all the seriousness of an ancient Pegasus lieutenant taking orders from her armor general. "Sapphire cupcakes. Got it. Thank you, dear. I do appreciate it. And how was your little chat with Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash?" "Oh, it was good. Dashy talked about the Wonderbolts a lot, like she always does, and Fluttershy was sharing about the garden experiments she and I have been working on. I didn't even know you could experiment on tomatoes, but I guess you can." Rarity perked up a bit. "Very interesting, indeed. Our dear Fluttershy does appear to be spending quite a bit of time with the dazzling Miss Twilight Sparkle, does she not? I do wonder about the two of them." Pinky snorted in mirth. Dashy already asked about that, and Fluttershy turned almost as red as the tomatoes she's been experimenting on. She said she and Twilight are just friends, but Dashy said she wouldn't blush that much if she wasn't hiding something, and then Fluttershy said there was some pony else she liked. Pinky began hopping backwards, so that she was face to face with Rarity. But she wouldn't say who it is that she likes, even though Rainbow Dash tried really hard to find out, and I offered to Pinky promise to not tell any pony. "Oh, my." Rarity was delighted and scandalized, both at once. Immediately she began racking her brains, trying to remember if Fluttershy had mentioned any ponies particularly often in her most recent letters, but she couldn't recall any. "Aha!" Pinky grinned. "I don't think Twilight likes any pony, though. Well, that's not really true. I mean, Twilight likes lots of ponies, but I don't think she romantically likes any ponies." Rarity sadly shook her head. "Ah, the cost of being married to one's work. A life in academia is a lonely one. I'd had such high hopes, too, back when she and Princess Luna." The rest of what she'd been about to say trailed off into nothing, as something suddenly caught her interest. Carousel Boutique. It was no longer a clothing boutique, of course, as she'd sold the building before she had left town, but the exterior of the former boutique had been left exactly the same. It was odd, seeing it look as it had all those years ago, back when it had been her pride and joy. She stood and stared at the building, trying to figure out how she ought to feel. How she wanted to feel. Her life, Rarity realized, had been so much simpler before she'd invited Pinkie Pie up to Canterlot. Not necessarily happier, but simpler. Very quietly, Pinkie stepped up beside the unicorn and leaned against her. "I bet you could buy it back. If you wanted to, Igno." Rarity swallowed over the lump in her throat. "I imagine I could, yes. I mean, you don't have to, but I know that Applejack says Dashy might be moving back too." "I'm not Rainbow Dash." "Well, of course not. Dashy's a Pegasus, and you're a unicorn. Plus, I bet you brush your mane a whole lot more than Rainbow Dash does. It's not as easy as all of you are making it out to be." Rarity felt suddenly and irrationally angry, almost frightened, like an animal who had been backed into a corner. "I've built a career in Canterlot. I've built an entire life. I can't just abandon it on a whim." I don't think any pony said you should, Rarity." "Well, what if I should decide to stay in Canterlot? What then?" She hated asking the question, and yet it was a question that had to be asked. But when she received nothing except silence in reply, she shut her eyes and regretted that she'd done so. It had been such a nice night before now, before she'd gone and ruined everything. And really, the question could have waited until later, couldn't it? She could still feel Pinkie Pie leaning against her, could still feel Pinkie's warmth through her skin. It felt lovely on an evening as chilly as this one. "If you decide to stay in Canterlot," Pinkie said at length, slowly, thoughtfully, "then I guess I'll be taking the train to Canterlot a whole bunch more." Rarity opened her eyes. Pinkie was looking at her with those big, blue eyes of hers, and the unicorn wondered how those eyes seemed always to contain a hint of knowing, of secret knowledge. It was vaguely unsettling. "I didn't mean it how it sounded," Rarity murmured in reply. "When I said that You want a whim, Pinkie Pie. We want a whim." Pinkie smiled, a smile just as complex and mysterious as the expression in her eyes. "I already knew that, you silly filly. But thanks for saying so, anyways." She couldn't sleep. So instead of tossing and turning in a strange bed, in a strange room, Rarity had gone to the roof of Sugar Cube Corner. She stood with her head tilted back and her eyes trained on the night sky above. The stars truly were dazzling. As she stood under Luna's sky, she found herself contrasting tonight's sky with the one that had greeted her outside the dirty nightclub back in Canterlot, which seemed like such a long time ago, now, though of course it really wasn't. She found herself reflecting upon the surprising and lovely answer Pinkie had given to the question of why she liked Rarity. And she found herself closing her eyes and remembering what it had felt like to actually kiss the unpredictable pony who slumbered within the bakery. She still didn't know what she should do. Whether she should stay in Canterlot or move back to Ponyville. Her musings were cut by the sound of quiet laughter drifting up from below. Opening her eyes, she glanced down and spotted Snips approaching the bakery with a small group of ponies by his side. 3 of the ponies she recognized instantly. Sweetie Belle's good friends Scootaloo and Apple Bloom were there, as was Pinkie's young baking apprentice, Twist, but the last pony took her a moment to identify. He was a tall stallion, lanky, awkward, and he looked naggingly familiar. The 5 young ponies stood in front of Sugar Cube Corner for a few minutes, talking and laughing, before the mares in the group headed off in separate directions while waving goodbye. The entire time, Rarity stood atop the bakery, unseen and unnoticed, while she tried to remember the name of the second stallion. By this point, Snips was fidgeting, even more than the nervous unicorn usually did. The other stallion appeared a bit nervous too but was smiling regardless. He took a step forward and, as he did, Snips stopped, fidgeted and stood deathly still. A few words were exchanged, too soft for Rarity to hear, and then the other stallion dipped his head and placed a light kiss on Snip's muzzle. The kiss was over almost as soon as it had begun, and then the taller unicorn was bounding off. Snip stood outside the bakery and watched him go with a dreamy expression on his face. Snails. That was the name of the other stallion. A full-haired friend of her assistant, if Rarity remembered correctly. Eventually, after Snails had disappeared from view, Snips turned around and finally entered Sugar Cube Corner. Even before he had shut the door behind him, the gears in Rarity's mind were whirring away. It seemed that she'd been incorrect in her assumptions about Snips and Twist. But, then, there were a lot of things, and a lot of ponies, about which she'd been incorrect, weren't there? She'd been wrong about Fluttershy and Twilight, she'd been wrong about the Duchess of Hoofington, and she'd been wrong about Pinkie. Oh, how very wrong she'd been about Pinkie, in so very many ways. Because you're always trying to make ponies happy. Because you look at the world and see all kinds of ways of making it really, really beautiful. And just like that, Rarity had her answer. She knew exactly what to do. Are you sure you can't stay in town for a few more days? Fluttershy's eyes were huge, colossal, and as dewy as a meadow on a crisp spring morning. Rarity could feel her resolve crumbling by the second. Looking towards the stationary train, instead, the unicorn replied, I'm afraid so, darling. The boutique won't run itself. But I promise I'll arrange another visit soon. She grinned wickedly. And perhaps then you'll finally tell me just what lucky mare or stallion you have your eyes set upon. Oh, Rarity. Fluttershy sounded aghast. Meanwhile, Twilight was glancing around and frowning. You know, I would have thought Pinkie would be here to say goodbye. Rainbow Dash, too. Odd. Oh, yeah, about that. Applejack rolled her eyes. Pinkie swung by the farm and napped RD this morning. Said she had a super big surprise or something and she needed Rainbow's help to pull it off. Twilight's eyebrows knit together. That can't mean anything good. Certainly not, agreed Rarity, with a concerned look of her own. Although she felt no small measure of dismay at the very thought of the trouble Pinkie and Dash could cause together, she also felt a sudden rush of relief flood through her as the realization that Pinkie hadn't forgotten to come to the train station this morning. Pinkie hadn't forgotten her. It was a ridiculous thing to worry over, of course, and yet, worry she had. Things were still so new, so tentative. Her thoughts halted when she suddenly felt Fluttershy's hooves wrap around her neck and Fluttershy's cheek press up against her own. I'm really happy for you, Rarity, the Pegasus whispered, very softly, low enough that only Rarity could hear. I always knew you'd find your prince or princess. Tenderly Rarity returned her friend's hug as she whispered in reply, thank you, darling. As Fluttershy stepped back, Twilight came forward to give Rarity a hug, as well. Good luck with the situation with the Duchess, Rarity. If there's anything we can do to help, I shan't hesitate to call upon you. Good. Twilight pulled back and smiled. And, well, you know we all love hearing from you, but if you could write some letters to Spike specifically, I think he'd really appreciate it. Say no more, Twilight Sparkle. I'll have Snip's pencil in a reminder on my calendar to write a weekly letter to our dear little Spike. Applejack was next, and the Earth Pony's strong embrace was nearly rib-crushing. You take care of yourself, yeah? The Earth Pony said firmly, in a tone reminiscent of the one she once used with a young apple bloom. Don't let none o' them Canterlotians give you any guff. Rarity chuckled. I appreciate the sentiment, Applejack, and I will make sure that I do not take any guff, as you so colorfully put it. Applejack gave a small nod of satisfaction. Oh, my goodness. Rarity turned in time to see Fluttershy looking upwards with a startled expression on her face. Following the Pegasus gaze, she spotted a familiar dot of blue streaking through the sky. Also familiar was the pink dot which seemed to be riding atop the blue dot. Together, the two dots weaved in and out of the clouds above, shaping them, sculpting them. Finally, after a few minutes, the clouds had been turned into full words. Have a super great trip back. We'll miss you lots and lots. PDP. Rarity smiled despite herself. Very gallant, she murmured under her breath. She felt quite certain she was blushing, but for once, she couldn't bring herself to care. But then the blue and pink dots continued zigzagging across the sky, and Rarity watched with renewed interest to see what might be spelled out next. It took significantly less time than the first message, as the second message was considerably shorter. P. S. AJ is best pony. RD. Still smiling, Rarity glanced over to Applejack. The farmer's eyes were locked onto the clouds above their heads, a tiny grin on her lips. Crazy, fool-headed Pegasus, she muttered, her voice just a touch watery. Don't know what I'm gonna do with her. Rarity walked over and leaned companionably against Applejack. In a bright tone of voice, she offered, I suppose you'll just have to do what I do with Pinkie Pie. Oh? And what's that? As soon as I figure that out, darling, you'll be the first to know. Surreptitiously she watched Snips as the stallion stared out the train window at the passing scenery with boyish glee. He was different than the colt she'd known all those years ago, the one who had lured an Ursa Minor into town, but in many ways, he was much the same as ever. Perhaps that's why she liked him so much. Perhaps that's why she had invited him to come to Canterlot with her when she had started up the new boutique. Perhaps it didn't really matter. She suspected that's what Pinkie Pie would tell her, Anyway, if Pinky were there. Snips, darling? He turned around to face her, a dreamy little smile on his face. Yes, Lady Rarity. I was just thinking. The truth was, she wasn't sure exactly what he was going to say to her idea. But she'd never know if she never asked. You've been with me a good many years, now. I was wondering if you haven't ever thought of setting out independently. His smile was gone in an instant. Are you firing me? Did I do something wrong? No. Oh, no, no, no. That's not what I meant at all. Rarity shook her head. If anything, it would be akin to a promotion. A promotion? Yes, Snips. A promotion. She smiled gently at her assistant as his face eased from panic into mild confusion. I had the funny little notion of starting up the old carousel boutique again while keeping the shop in Canterlot. Expand the business, you know. And, well, if I did so, I would need someone reliable and knowledgeable to run the Ponyville store, would I not? Oh. Well, sure. He tilted his head, looking puzzled. So I was going to run the Ponyville shop. Rarity resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Well, darling, I was hoping it would be you. His jaw dropped open. Oh really? Really and truly. The young stallion's entire face lit up like the palace during the grand galloping gala. Oh, thank you, Lady Rarity. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As the incessant show of gratitude continued, Rarity mentally tuned out her assistant and began ruminating over what would be needed to reopen her Ponyville boutique. She'd have to see if she could buy back the original building, of course, though there were others she could purchase and remodel if need be. She'd have to order fabrics, sewing machines, mannequins, and so forth. The next few weeks were going to be very busy, indeed. But it would be worth it. It was about time that Snips learned to stand on his own 4 feet, and with any luck, she'd soon be presented with the delightful opportunity to design not just one but 2 wedding tuxedos. Besides that, she'd also have the chance to begin making more affordable fashions again, like she had in the old days, as the Ponyville clothing market was considerably more downscale than the one in Canterlot. She had to admit that she rather liked the idea of a greater number of ponies being able to buy and wear her clothes. After all, her entire life's purpose was creating and sharing beauty. And the more ponies she could enhance and beautify with her clothing, the better. And that all of this would mean she'd have to come to Ponyville much more frequently than before. Well, that wasn't such a terrible fate, now, was it? Chapter 9. It was undoubtedly the most elegant party that Ponyville had ever seen, and Ponyville was a town that had seen more than its fair share of parties over the years. The newly reopened Carousel Boutique glittered and gleamed like the brightest jewel, and its new business manager stood at the very center, beaming as brightly as the sun, with his colt friend directly by his side. Both stallions were garbed in the finest suits imaginable, with matching neckties in a deep, royal purple, the exact same shade as a certain fashion designer's mane. Also inside the boutique was a string ensemble specially imported from Canterlot, fronted by the quickly rising singer Sweetie Belle, whose services for the evening were only procured through a combination of pure nepotism and the promise of all the cupcakes she could eat. Across the room from the singer and musicians stood long tables filled with the most intricately decorated desserts that a pony could ever wish to see. Tarts and bonbons and miniature eclairs were all laid out on the daintiest of crystal platters. And in the very middle was erected a giant tower of sapphire-encrusted cupcakes, nay, an entire mountain of cupcakes, which sparkled as bright and as blue as the eyes of the baker who had created them. Rarity and Pinkie Pie had positioned themselves right inside the shop's doors, greeting each guest as he or she entered with, respectively, the utmost grace and warmest enthusiasm. Nearly every pony who came through the doors marveled at the 2 finely attired hostesses, both dressed in Lady Rarity originals, and at their co-hosting abilities. For every time Rarity's face went slightly slack with an absence of recognition, Pinkie leapt forward to shake hands and introduce herself to the newly arrived pony, whose name she invariably had right on the tip of her tongue. Every time Pinkie Pie began to encroach just a bit too much into another pony's personal space, Rarity would slip between the two, as smooth as silk, and gently back Pinkie away without so much as a hiccup in the conversation. And every so often, both ponies would happen to glance at one another at the exact same time and, as their eyes met, they would share a small, intimate smile. It was like watching an intricate waltz, performed by two talented and well-practiced dancers. Most of those attending the party found it beautiful to behold, especially the group of 4 mares that hovered by the desserts table, giggling and grinning like mischievous little fillies. The young dragon who accompanied the 4 seemed considerably less amused, but he soothed himself with double and triple helpings of the cupcakes. All in all, it was as fine an evening as any could ever wish to see. It had taken many long months of hard work, but as Rarity surveyed the new yet old boutique, she couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. Everything was going precisely according to plan. "Good evening, Lady Rarity." The pale green unicorn's mouth twitched, as if she wasn't sure whether or not she ought to smile. "And a good evening to you, as well, Lady Pinkamena." It was at this point that Rarity's considerable poise finally failed her, and she could only stare in naked shock. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, Pinkie Pie jumped into the breach with her customary verve and cheerfulness. "Hiya, Duchess. We're super glad you could make it." "Thank you for having me, Lady Pinkamena," the Duchess of Hoofington replied, in a tone that heated somewhere between dignified and nervous. I was pleased to receive your invitation." "Invitation? That was most certainly not according to plan." "Pinkie," said Rarity, once she'd found her voice again. "Could you be a dear and stay to greet our guests while I have a word with the Duchess?" For the briefest moment, Pinkie's eyes looked cloudy and uncertain. But the troubled expression passed as quickly as a spring shower in May, and then Pinkie flashed her co-hostess a quick smile. "Sure thing, Rarity." "Thank you, darling. I do appreciate it." Rarity turned to the Duchess, wearing a strained smile, and inclined her head. The other unicorn gave a small curtsy and began to follow after the fashion designer as Rarity carefully threaded her way through the crowded boutique. As they headed towards the kitchen, they passed by Hooty Tooty and Photo Finish, who were chatting animatedly with one another and offered them distracted hellos, followed soon after by Fancy Pants and Fleur de Lis, who were speaking with Applejack and Fluttershy respectively. Fancy Pants put on one of his best poker-faced smiles as the Duchess passed by, while Fleur simply gave the Duchess a baleful look that seemed to be made of pure ice. Finally, they reached the relative safety and privacy of the boutique's kitchen. Rarity tried her best to ignore her jangling nerves as she worked to keep her smile in place. "Tell me, Duchess, how is your daughter? Did she care for the dress I made for her?" This seemed a neutral enough opening gambit. "Oh, indeed she did. Her dress was the talk of the party. But then, a Lady Rarity original is the talk of any party, isn't it?" The noble mare's tone was haughty, with more than a hint of smarm, and it made a thrill of irritation run through Rarity just as it always did. But there was something else there, something in the Duchess' eyes, an anxiety, a tension. Something that belied the haughtiness and the smarm. And Rarity realized the words weren't mere insincere flattery. She realized that, all this time, it hadn't just been about quid pro quo and social chess. She realized that this was, in fact, the Duchess' way of bestowing a compliment. Her way of flirting, even. "Thank you," the designer replied, quietly and sincerely. "I'm quite glad to hear she was pleased with the gown. She's a charming girl, your daughter. She truly is. She's more like her father was, I must confess, than she is like her mother." The Duchess wouldn't quite meet Rarity's eyes. "I received your note. It was generous of you to say all that you said." Rarity took a deep breath. It was hardly generous. Overdue, possibly. Perhaps even insufficient. But not generous. Even so. Thank you for writing to me. An uneasy silence settled between the two unicorns for a few long moments, where the only sounds to be heard were the soft singing, muffled conversation, and clinking of glasses coming from the main room. "I don't know if it's possible for you and I to ever become friends, Duchess," Rarity said at last, very delicately, "but at the very least, I should like us to no longer be enemies." It was then that the other unicorn finally met Rarity's gaze, and she offered up a small but genuine smile. "I believe I should like that as well, Lady Rarity." Rarity returned the smile with one that was just as genuine. "I wasn't wrong about your little Ponyville friends, however. Can't imagine what the princess was thinking in bestowing those ladyships." The Duchess rolled her eyes. "Although perhaps I should have been a bit more diplomatic in how I phrased things." Rarity's smile tightened. For a brief moment she felt tempted, ever so tempted, to make a veiled cutting remark or perhaps discreetly tear the Duchess' dress with a well-applied burst of magic. But then, suddenly, unbidden, came the remembrance of deep blue eyes, shimmering and wet with tears. And she chose to hold both her tongue and her magic. Unsurprisingly for a party hosted by Pinkie Pie, the festivities lasted well into the night and, just as unsurprisingly, the bearers of the elements of harmony were the very last to leave as the evening drew to its inevitable close. A proper hostess to the very end, Rarity stood at the boutique's entryway with a still bouncing Pinkie on one side and a slightly drooping Sweetie Belle on the other. Graciously she held open the door as the other four elements bearers drooped past, tired but smiling. "Thank you ever so much for coming," Rarity trilled. "I do apologize for being unable to spend more time chatting with all of you." "Oh, that's all right, Rarity." Twilight Sparkle shifted on her hooves, to more evenly distribute the weight of the young dragon who was fast asleep and sprawled across her back. Spike was really too large to still ride on Twilight's back, but she stubbornly insisted on carrying him all the same. "We knew you'd be busy tonight. We're just glad you'll be in town for a few weeks this time around." Rainbow Dash nodded enthusiastically and very, very drunkenly. "Heck, yeah. It's gonna be just like old times." Inside voice, "Sugar Cube," hissed Applejack, while Pinkie giggled. "Ah, come on, AJ, what's the big deal? All the snooter ponies left hours ago." Rainbow's head lolled against the farm pony's shoulder. "Good thing, too. I don't think the Duchess or whoever really liked me that much." In a quiet voice, Fluttershy offered, "I think that's because you threw up on her dress, Rainbow." "I told her I was sorry. Besides, it was an accident." Applejack rolled her eyes as she began steering Dash out the door. "Night, y'all. Thanks for having us to your fancy shindig." "Good night, darlings." "Nighty-night, guys." Rarity watched with fond amusement as the quartet stumbled down the road. Twilight sagging under Spike's weight while Applejack and Fluttershy leaned against Rainbow Dash on either side, in a valiant but mostly futile attempt to keep the intoxicated Pegasus upright. Only after they had rounded a corner and vanished from view did Rarity finally turn around and look over to her sister. Sweetie Belle was gazing at the opened door with longing in her eyes. Rarity couldn't begrudge her sister the desire to go spend time with her own friends, she supposed, but that didn't mean she particularly had to like it. Putting on her very best pout, the elder unicorn said in a wheedling tone, "Are you absolutely certain you can't stay in Ponyville for longer?" "Afraid not, Big Sis. I've got a really big concert in Philadelphia tomorrow night." Sweetie Belle chuckled. "Besides, we're still having brunch together in the morning, right?" Rarity smiled fondly in return. "Why, of course we are, sweetie." "Great. Then I'll see you tomorrow morning." She leaned forward to deposit a kiss on her sister's cheek before bounding out the open door. "Night, Rarity. Night, Pinkie. Say hi to April Bloom and Scodaloo for us." Pinkie shouted after her. "Sure thing." Sweetie paused long enough to glance over her shoulder with a grin. "Take good care of Rarity for me, okay, Pinkie?" The pink pony snapped to attention and executed a near-militaristic salute. ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Rarity sighed softly as her baby sister, no longer a baby, disappeared into the night to cause goodness knew what sorts of trouble with her fillyhood friends. And to think that once upon a time it was I who was too busy for her. Ah, don't be sad, Rarity. You know Sweetie loves you lots and lots. It's just something that happens with little sisters. They're like tiny, itty, bitty birds, and when they grow up, they just gotta fly the nest. Or maybe they're more like griffins? Pinky thoughtfully tapped a hoof to her chin. Or pterodactyls. Little sisters could be kinda like pterodactyls, I guess. Even though they don't really. Rarity knew full well that Pinky could keep rambling for quite a while longer and decided she had better take action. In one smooth movement Rarity stepped forward and kissed Pinkie Pie, kissed her swiftly and fiercely, and enjoyed the soft gasp of surprise that came from the other pony. But despite her surprise, the Earth Pony returned the kiss with all of her characteristic enthusiasm, and Rarity found herself slightly out of breath by the time she pulled away. She was pleased to see that Pinky seemed the tiniest bit breathless, as well. The unicorn smiled triumphantly. Well, my dear Pinky. Shall we be off? We're going somewhere? Pinky tilted her head, the very picture of confusion. Shouldn't we clean up all this party stuff first? Oh, no need to bother with that. Snips and Snails will take care of it in the morning, I'm sure. Rarity adopted a lofty, virtuous tone as she added, the very least I can do for Snips, the dear boy, is to give him some responsibility. It's very character building, you know. Pinkie Pie raised a skeptical eyebrow. Rarity decided to bring out the big guns. If you want to stay to clean, that's quite all right with me, of course. But I was hoping to show you a surprise that I'd prepared for. Ooh. A surprise? For me. Only if you're interested, darling. Yes. Pinky began hopping in excitement. Surprise. Yes. Yay. As Rarity stepped out into the brisk night air and locked up the boutique, Pinky followed right on her heels, peppering the unicorn with questions as to the exact nature of the promised surprise. The unicorn ignored her with practiced ease as she trotted down the darkened, empty streets of Ponyville. It was so much darker than it ever was in Canterlot, except in the very seediest of back alleys, but somehow it didn't feel cold or lonely the way that nighttime in Canterlot sometimes did. Soon enough they'd reached the destination Rarity had in mind, and she turned towards Pinky with sparkling eyes. The Earth Pony frowned. But Rarity, this is just Sugar Cube Corner. That is an excellent observation. Rarity tooted a bit, unable to contain her glee. Open the door, darling. Although she still seemed confused, Pinky did as she was told. She unlocked the door and peeked her head inside. In an instant, the door was thrown the rest of the way open, and Pinkie Pie was bounding into the center of the bakery with a happy shriek of amazement and delight. Oh, my gosh, Rarity. Rarity ambled in at a more leisurely pace, feeling exceedingly pleased with herself and her accomplishments. The bakery was decorated to within an inch of its life, with every sort of balloon, streamer, and other imaginable scrap of party paraphernalia, in every color under the sun. In the very middle of it all was a table, covered in a tablecloth made of the shiniest plastic, which held cookies and sarsaparilla. Above the table hung a banner, large and proud, that read, "Welcome to your surprise party, Pinkie Pie," with each and every letter printed in the unholiness that was Comic Sans. It was tacky. It was horrible. It was a complete assault on taste, decorum, and all things beautiful and refined. It was perfect. There's so many cookies. Ooh, and sarsaparilla too. Pinkie Pie flitted from one corner of the bakery to the next like a large pink hummingbird. Oh, and look at those streamers. Those are such great streamers, Rarity. Quietly the unicorn murmured, I know you're not fond of Canterlot-style parties like the one we threw tonight, so I thought I'd prepare one more to your liking for afterwards. Boy, is it ever! Pinky exclaimed, finally skidding to a half in front of the other pony. "But how did you have the time to do all this?" "We spent all afternoon getting ready for the party at the boutique." "Oh, it was simplicity itself, darling. I enlisted your assistant Twist's help in getting the preparations ready." It had not, in fact, been simplicity itself. It had, in fact, been a headache and a half to accomplish all this. But Pinkie didn't need to know that. Rarity couldn't help a small, smug smile. "So, is this, or is this not, an acceptable surprise, him?" In lieu of a verbal answer, the Earth Pony leapt forward and attacked with a volley of rapid-fire kisses. Rarity was quickly tackled to the floor of Sugar Cube Corner and, as Pinkie's kisses came slower and deeper, the unicorn was surprised to find that she didn't mind being tackled quite as much as she usually might. She leaned back and wrapped her forelegs around Pinkie's neck, breathing in the scent of the pink mane that fell lightly against her cheek. Pinkie's mane smelled of softness and warmth and the slightest hint of something sweet but not too sweet. The cookies went uneaten, and the sarsaparilla went undrank. There was only the barest hint of light filtering in from the bedroom window when Rarity first cracked open her eyes. Drowsily she blinked and wondered as to just why she'd awoken so early. Glancing around the familiar room, bright, cheerful, and virtually unchanged from the first time she had ever set hoof in it, she took inventory of what she saw. Table, chairs, closet, balloon stash, party cannon. Ah, there was the problem, right there. The bright, cheerful room was distinctly lacking a bright, cheerful pink pony. The light clattering of hooves from the roof above tipped off Rarity as to just where Pinkie Pie might have disappeared to, although she could have guessed even without that clue. With only slight reluctance, the unicorn roused herself from bed. She stopped by the bathroom, to give her mane a thorough brushing and take care of other general morning maintenance, before she headed upstairs. Pinkie sat towards the edge of the roof, uncharacteristically still, her eyes fixed firmly on the hills that lay just outside of Ponyville. The first hints of sunlight were just slipping above the horizon, and the entire world hung in that ineffable, mysterious balance between what was night and what was day. Silently, Rarity approached and took her place beside the other mare. As soon as she'd sat down, Pinkie leaned over and rested her head against Rarity's shoulder. Sometimes, Pinkie began dreamily and without preamble, as though they'd already been talking for hours, "I like to wake up before all the other ponies so I can watch the sunrise. It'd be better if there was a rainbow like there was in Canterlot that one time. Ooh, or 2 rainbows, or even 3. But it's still kinda nice even without any rainbows at all. Don't you think?" Rarity merely nodded in reply. She rested her chin on top of Pinkie's puffy mane, which was as warm and soft as ever, and tried to ignore the stray frizzy hairs that tickled at her nose. "It's even nicer to have some pony to watch with, though." There was a pause, long and languid. "Say, Rarity." "Yes, Pinkie? I love you. You know that, right?" Rarity froze. She dreamt of this moment, dreamt of hearing a pony confess love to her, so many times over so many years. She had always imagined that it would involve a candlelit dinner at a fancy restaurant, followed by a walk through the palace gardens, moonlight, music, perhaps a dozen red roses. She had pictured an eloquent declaration, words both poetic and passionate, whispered in a voice that was smooth and dark and seductively low. She had never anticipated this moment would come on the rooftop of a bakery in the cold air of dawn, nor that the words she longed to hear would be uttered in a perfectly matter-of-fact tone by a pink earth pony. She dreamt of princes, not bakers. Of elaborate and over-the-top romantic gestures, not simple and uncomplicated affection. "I think I've known for a while, darling," the unicorn said softly, closing her eyes and smiling. "And I love you, as well. So very, very much." No, truth be told, this wasn't at all what Rarity had ever imagined for herself. It was better. Epilogue. As the train rattled merrily down the tracks, she couldn't help but sneak glances at the orange earth pony sitting beside her, It wasn't a whim or an impulse that led her to do so, but rather a stark need, one that was inexplicably strong. She couldn't shake the nagging fear that the other pony might disappear on her all over again, if she didn't keep vigilantly checking to make sure she was still there. Her wings wouldn't stay still, either, but fluttered constantly with a nervous sort of energy. It might have just been from being cooped up in a small train car, though. It didn't have to mean anything more than that. Every once in a while, she'd get busted. She'd be looking over, and the earth pony would lift her head at that exact same moment, and her breath would catch in her throat, as a feeling almost like embarrassment filled her up from hooves to wings. But those green eyes would only smile at her, all friendliness and joy, and she'd find herself smiling in reply almost involuntarily. Then, after another beat or two of companionable silence, they'd both turn their heads away from one another and resume whatever they'd been doing before. Eventually, she settled back against her seat, listening with half an ear as Applejack began regaling Twilight and Fluttershy with stories of the rodeo competition. She gazed out the train window at the barren desert landscape as it was Z-bind, with a sleepy yawn, felt completely and utterly content with her world. They were all back together, they were whole, and they were all headed home. Nothing else mattered. Perhaps when they got back, she and Pinkie could play a prank on Big Macintosh, maybe something having to do with... Oh, my gosh. Abruptly she sat forward, her eyes wide and panicked, all sleepiness gone in an instant. "What is it?" asked Twilight, the frown audible in her voice. "What's wrong, Rainbow Dash?" Rarity and Pinkie Pie. Cold horror washed over the Pegasus. "Oh, man. Oh man, oh man, oh man. Rarity is gonna kill me." The end. Bonus mini-story. Responsibility. Rarity gasped as the pink pony before her nibbled a line from the base of Rarity's neck up to her ear. Then, as Pinkie Pie began licking along the outer edge of that same ear, Rarity bit down on a moan even as she went into a full-body shudder. Every lick was warm and wet and delightfully vulgar. Never let it be said, Rarity thought wryly, that Pinkie Mina Diane Pie does not have a silver tongue. It was the thought of Pinkie's full legal name that snapped Rarity back to her senses. She opened her eyes. Eyes which she hadn't even noticed had slipped shut, and saw Pinkie's beautiful face just a few inches away. Pinkie was grinning at her. The grin was playful, silly, and affectionate, but Pinkie's eyes... those deep blue eyes were heavy-lidded. Hungry. Another shudder ran straight down Rarity's spine. Even so, Rarity was a mirror of no small amount of willpower and self-control, and so she set aside how much she wanted to ravish the pink mare and instead gently pushed Pinkie back with her forehooves. "What's wrong, Rarashine?" Pinkie Pie waggled her eyebrows, an action which somehow managed to be ridiculous and seductive both at once. "I thought we were playing doctor?" Rarity took a deep breath. "No, darling. I had asked you how you became a doctor." She took a few steps back and, glancing over to the nightstand that sat beside Pinkie's bed, levitated over a business card that had been sitting there. Reading aloud from the card, she quoted, "Pinkie Pie, Esquire, DDS, PhD. Sugar Cube Corner, Proprietress. Caterer, Party Planner, and Balloon Animal Artist." Pinkie's grin flickered, momentarily. Then the earth pony laughed. "Oh, that. Why would you want to hear about something dumb and boring like that?" She grabbed the business card between her teeth, trotted to the opposite end of her studio apartment, and set it down on a low set of bookshelves. "Ooh, I know. Instead of that, I could tell you about how I won first prize in the Tri-County Balloon Animal Making Competition." Pinkie. "And then I can make you a big, fancy dinner, like the ones you eat in Canterlot, and then after dinner you can cast that one spell that Twilight likes to pretend she didn't teach you." Pinkie. "And then, after that, I could give you the bestest massage ever, with all of those funny smelling oils and..." Pinkie Mina Diane Pie. Pinky's ears went flat against her head, and she scuffed a hoof along the floor of the apartment. She glanced over her shoulder at Rarity and, when she did, Rarity saw that the other pony's eyes were glistening. "Oh, my dear Pinky." Rarity sighed and crossed the room, wrapping Pinky from behind in her very best hug. "You needn't tell me the story, truly. Not if you don't wish to do so. I hate the thought that you don't trust me. Or can't trust me, perhaps." Pinky shook her head. "Nuh-uh. I do trust you, Rarity. I totally do. It's just..." Rarity waited in silence for Pinky to continue. As she waited, she gently stroked the earth pony's mane. It wasn't much, she knew, but it was something. "It's not really a very happy story." Rarity tightened her hug. Still she said nothing. Pinky sighed and leaned back against Rarity's chest. "Back when I was a filly, I always got really good grades in school. I even got to skip ahead some grades. So my parents thought maybe I could get a scholarship to a state college." When Pinky stopped there and fell quiet, Rarity allowed a few seconds to pass before she asked, "And did you?" "Aha. Full tuition, room and board, everything. And I liked my classes a lot. I was a music major when I first started, and I really learned all kinda neat stuff about singing and writing songs." She let out another sigh, but it sounded different than the first one. Less sad and more wistful. "And I duper liked meeting all the other ponies from all over Equestria, but then things got bad, back at the farm. There wasn't a lot of money, and there wasn't a lot of food. And I was the oldest. My sisters were just fillies who still lived with Mom and Dad. So I had to." Pinkie Pie shrugged. "Well, it's not very responsible. Being a music major." And as Pinky sniffled and as Pinky's shoulders began shaking, Rarity buried her face in the voluminous pink mane in front of her and closed her eyes. She held Pinky to her as tightly as she could. The seconds ticked by as an uncustomary silence reigned through Sugar Cube Corner. In the stillness, the two ponies leaned heavily against one another, and the two ponies' breaths slowly synchronized, their chests rising and falling as one. Finally, in a trembling voice, Rarity whispered, "Pinkie Pie, you are the most generous pony I have ever met." She pressed a tender kiss into Pinky's mane. "And I have never loved you more than I do right here and right now."